We can do a lot of interesting things with images that come from our telescopes. And one of the most fun things to do, I think, is create a three-dimensional fly-through. It takes a little work, but it's worth the effort. Now, I had started to make this video once before, and I was making a super in-depth one, and it had 14 layers, and then I realized it's going to take me over an hour to demonstrate this process, and it's too complex to make one that's sophisticated for a basic teaching video. So I decided to make a fly-through that requires just 4 or 5 layers. And let's go ahead and get started. We're going to use an image that I recently created of the interior of the Heart Nebula. And as you can see, we're starting off with a starless plate. We'll need our stars, but we're going to add them later. And you have to begin this with a starless plate. If you begin your background with a plate with stars already in it, it's going to throw off the full power of the three-dimensional effect. To make a three-dimensional fly-through, you're going to require 3 applications: a layer-based photo editor, such as Affinity Photo, a video editor. In my case, I'm partial to DaVinci Resolve, though there are plenty of other good ones out there, such as HitFilm, which is very good at handling special effects. And you're going to need an application that can make a Flying Stars video clip. I use Space Engine, which you can find on Steam. The first thing we have to do is divide an image up into layers, so we'll start with our photo editor, here Affinity Photo. Now, to make a three-dimensional fly-through, whatever image that you're going to work with, you need to look at that image and find the different structures. Those are what we'll divide up into layers. And then, in the video editor, we will reassemble those layers and set them so that they zoom and move across the screen to give an illusion of depth. It's not a difficult nor complex process, but it tends to take some trial and error to get it right. And it's probably easier to illustrate this than explain it. So let's go ahead and jump in. Now, I already have the image, the Heart of the Heart Nebula, opened in Affinity Photo. I'm going to begin selecting out regions of it and cutting and pasting those regions back into the image to create different layers of each portion of the image. To select any given region, we'll just use Affinity Photo's Intelligent Selection brush. It looks for patterns of differences in color and contrast to delineate differences in images. And in this one image, I see over a dozen individual substructures that can be divided out into layers. But like I was saying, dividing them all up would make an image that's just too complicated for educational purposes. So I'm going to divide this image up into 6 sections, and then later on, we'll need a revised version of the entire background. The primary structures that I see in this image are a cloud formation lower left, and another cloud formation just behind it or beyond it, lower center, a third cloud formation near the tower, sometimes called the Sword, near where the open star cluster is in the center, not shown now, called Merlot 15, a pyramid-like cloud structure upper left, the entire middle ground consisting of the Wizard and Sword, it's sometimes called, or the tower in the middle. I'm just going to refer to it as the Tower of the Heart. And in the upper right corner, dark background clouds behind the white foreground clouds, which, even though small, I'm going to let be another layer. Now let's begin using Affinity Photo to divide up these distinct sections into individual layers. We're going to use Affinity Photo's Selection Brush tool, which intelligently selects between areas of contrast and color difference. And we are essentially going to paint over the different areas, showing the Selection Brush tool what areas that we want it to select. Now, the Selection Brush tool tends to do a good job, so we're going to have to help it along a little bit by, once we've selected out our primary areas, we're going to have to select an additional bit of margin around the structure that we want to collect. And then that margin will partially erase out using an erase brush set to a flow of 20 and a hardness of 0. That way, it'll create a graduated erased margin around each structure of the cloud. And this will help the edges of each layer blend in more smoothly with the sections around them. Now, with the structure of the lower left selected, we'll just cut that section out, and then we're going to paste it back in. This creates a new layer that we'll name F1 for Foreground 1. And then we're going to make this layer invisible. Go ahead and select the main image again, in this case labeled Background, and select the next structures, which is the cloud structure off to the left, and the rising triangular structure lower center. It's important to go back and select the background layer each time that you start to select out a different layer of the image. It's also important to remember to go up top to the select options in the menu and click on the deselect option. Otherwise, Affinity Photo will just add the new selection to your previous selection. With our selection made, we'll cut this out and then paste it back in to once again create another layer and name this layer F2 for foreground 2. Now we're going to rinse and repeat for the upper left structure, the cloud structure upper right, and the tower, and a broad range of the center of the image will become the middle layer. Like I said at the introduction, there are many smaller layers within this image, but selecting them all to make a super complicated and sophisticated 3D fly-through would overcomplicate this video and require it to be over an hour long. I had actually started to make it earlier and realized that was a mistake, at least for teaching purposes here. Let's speed through the selection, cutting, and pasting back in to create individual layers of the remaining structures. With all of our individual layers made, we're going to save them as PNGs. It's important to use the PNG file format here because video editors recognize transparencies in PNGs, any areas that we designate as transparent. And right now we're going to designate some areas as transparent. We're going to take the erase brush, set the flow to 100 so it does a very solid erase job, but the hardness to 0 so it makes an erase gradient, giving us nice soft edges that will transitionally blend into whatever is behind them. And we're going to erase out the visible edges of each one of these layers in this way. I know it's a little tedious, but it's really important. If we leave solid edges, it's going to look like an unnatural transition when we actually put the fly-through together later on. Now the edges are still too distinct. I'm going to keep passing the brush over the margins until the edges of each layer fade out entirely but gradually into the background. When the edges of each layer graduate down to complete transparency, we are ready to save them, and then we can take those files and start turning the static image into a dynamic fly-through. Now I've moved over into my preferred video editor, where I've dragged all of the layers into it except for the flyby stars layer. We'll bring that one in a bit. The first thing that we're going to do is drag the background into the timeline and put it all the way at the base of the timeline on video layer 1. We'll need the entire background because it provides fill space. As the divided up layers move, they'll move over that fill space, creating a sense of fullness. Otherwise, as we zoomed into the field to create that three-dimensional effect, it would look like space was shattering like glass. Like this. Now I'm going to take all the other layers and add them each to the video timeline. Foreground 1 will go at the very top, foreground 2 will go below that, and so on. The next step is that we'll have to set up keyframes on each layer. Keyframes provide an automated way to control how video clips zoom and move on the screen. We're going to set keyframes at the beginning and the end of each clip, and then use those keyframes to independently zoom in and move each clip. Foreground 1, ostensibly the closest, will zoom in a little faster and move off the screen to the left a little faster too. Foreground 2, behind it, will zoom in a little slower and move off the screen to the left but not as much, creating an illusion of distance. The tower layer, which I've labeled foreground for prime foreground, though I should have called it background, will zoom in straight at the camera, but slower than foregrounds 1 and 2. After all, it's supposed to be far, far away, and things that are far away appear to get closer to us slower than things are already up close. Think of it this way: if you were walking toward a mountain on the horizon, and there were trees in the foreground and hills in the middle distance, you would pass the closest trees first, and the hills in the middle distance would take longer to seem to get bigger and closer, while that mountain, way off in the distance, would barely seem to get closer at all. We want to emulate that effect here, so we pass foreground 1 fastest, foreground 2 the second fastest, and the prime foreground, the tower at the center, zooms in the slowest. We use our keyframes to control just how fast the zoom is and how much and how far foreground layers 1 and 2 move to the left and off-center out of the screen. Let's take a closer look at this process. If you look at the structure, upper left, it corresponds to the UL layer on the timeline. And all the way on the left side of that timeline, I have a keyframe marked. You can see it upper right. Notice the red diamond? That means a keyframe is there. And all the way at the right, at the end of the timeline, I have another keyframe activated. Once again, you can see it in the red circle. Where there is no keyframe, the diamond is white, but where there is a keyframe, you see a red diamond. Beside the zoom keyframe marker, I can drag the numbers left or right, increasing and decreasing the zoom. Zooming in gives the appearance we are getting closer to that upper left structure. And just below the zoom keyframe, we see a position keyframe marker. Dragging those numbers controls the vertical and horizontal positions. The keyframe at the beginning of the timeline marks the starting position, and the layer will move and zoom to the position marked in the next keyframe, creating an animation. So the entire art of this process is determining how fast to zoom in a structure and how far left, right, up, or down it should move. Done correctly, this gives the impression that we are approaching an object, and as we get very close, it passes out of our view, either up, down, left, or right. So structures in the foreground and to the left will get larger faster and move off to the screen to the bottom and left. Structures in the foreground and to the right would get larger faster than, say, middle ground structures, and they would move off the screen to the right. Objects in the foreground, upper left, would get larger faster than objects in the midground and move off the screen up and to the left. Middle ground structures will behave very much like foreground structures. They will just zoom and move slower, while background structures will move slowest of all. There are also two star plates in this image, a JPG of the extracted stars and the stars flyby video clip. Both layers have been composited with the screen option, which allows the stars to show clearly over the structures of the layers below. The JPG plate has been zoomed to match the background plate, and it must exactly parallel the zoom rate and any movements of the background plate at all times. Thus, the stars of the image are accurately portrayed, and they become part of the background that we are flying toward. The flyby video clip created with Space Engine creates a very powerful illusion that we are actually flying through space. Apart from making sure that you select the Screen Composites option when you lay that video clip down, so that the stars can be seen over the underlying layers, just make sure the zoom of the flyby stars video clip exactly matches the background. And if you feel those stars are moving too fast or too slowly, use the speed change option to adjust their pace. If you are brand new to video editing, or perhaps have never even done it before, I know all of this is going to seem pretty confusing. There are a pile of good tutorials out there on how to use DaVinci Resolve and other video editors. It's not that complicated once you get used to it. It's just like working with layers in a layer-based photo editor, except instead of static changes, like just changing an image's color qualities and contrast qualities, you can also change how an image moves on the screen because you're working with video. The large structure that looks like a glowing pyramid on its side, upper left, I am treating as if it is very large and also very far away, so it zooms in slower and moves off the screen slower as well. I have set the duration of this clip to be an arbitrary 3 minutes. We don't want it to be too fast because these structures are very large, light years across, and we want to create the illusion of a spaceship traveling perhaps at trance-like speeds, but still, it's an enormous distance, so our progress is slow. 3 minutes, I feel, is a good amount of time to relate a sense of enormity of these nebulous structures and the immense amount of time that it would take even a fantastically fast spaceship, perhaps a spaceship capable of trans-light travel, to move across this nebulous structure. Notice also that I'm constantly grabbing the scroll bar and moving it back and forth to show me how the different layers are moving across the screen as we zoom in. This allows me to see how each individual layer moves, and go back and adjust zoom and movements on the keyframes to improve the sense of the illusion that as we zoom in to the image, we are actually flying past different structures of the nebula, which are at various distances and of different sizes. Now, there are a lot of stars in the Heart Nebula, and they somewhat overwhelm the image, especially when you consider we're also going to have a flyby star video clip in there too, so we should dim the static star plate. There are a lot of ways we could reduce the intensity of those stars, such as making that static star layer somewhat transparent, but the Curves tool is usually the most efficient and elegant. So I'm just going to grab the Curve tool, drag the lower end, and move it across the screen, making a compressed bottom side C-curve till I've dimmed out the star plate, muting out most of the background stars so they're not overwhelming. Now, for those who are curious how I created the Flyby Stars video clip, let's look at Space Engine. This is fundamentally a planetarium of the entire universe, and you can find it on Steam. It has great educational uses, and you can go to, well, really any place in the universe. If it's documented in an image, Space Engine renders it well in a 3D format. But it also quite realistically imagines what pretty much any place in the universe would look like. It's an amazing bit of software, well worth checking out. Anyway, I have Space Engine's screen capture mode activated, and I'm just video capturing some stars scrolling past at a speed that's going to work more or less for a video. As I noted previously, I don't have to worry too much about whether or not I have the speed perfect for a clip, because using the speed change option within DaVinci Resolve, I can speed up or slow down the timing of the clip, effectively making the stars look to move faster or slower. Alright, we have our video of stars and static clips in place. Let's review what we've done. Our foreground 1 and 2 images set off to the lower left. Foreground 1 will zoom and move off the screen a bit faster. Foreground 2 just a bit slower. The prime foreground, which really I should have called the background, the tower at the center of the screen, will zoom slower than foregrounds 1 and 2, and this will convey a sense of depth and distance. The structure on the upper left is imagined to be very large, like a mountain in the distance, so it's beyond all the foregrounds including the tower in the center, so it will zoom in and move off screen quite slowly. But, as it is so large, it will never move entirely off screen, nor all that much. Little things can also add a lot, and there is that very tiny bit of dark cloud off in the upper right. To portray it at a great distance, it will zoom but slowest of all. And even though it's only a small part of the image, the fact it barely zooms, while even the tower, far away, does, creates a tertiary sense of depth within the image. A real sense of moving in on something grand, something vast, something amazing, the heart of the Heart Nebula. And now that we have our video of stars that will fly through added to the image, as you can see here, scrolling through the image, there is an even more powerful illusion of movement. However, scrolling has revealed one last problem that we have to deal with. As the foreground 1 and 2 and upper left layers move out of view, the same structures, which are still part of the background image, will be revealed behind them. And that will break the spell of the illusion that we are moving forward through space, past these structures. So what I'm going to do is go back into Affinity Photo, duplicate the entire background, and name the duplicate layer Alter to Background. And then I'm going to use Affinity Photo's incredible in-painting brush, which has the ability to almost magically remove unwanted things from any image, and remove those structures from the image and any similar background. Affinity Photo's artificial intelligence is very powerful, and honestly it's just amazing how quick and effective it is at figuring out just what it is that you don't want in an image. When you erase out large images, which you can see in the lower left, it can create some repetitions of where the erasure is, but that can easily be corrected by just running the in-painting brush in little bits here and there scattered around that image to randomize things throughout it. This altered background doesn't have to be perfect anyway. It's essentially just filler space to create the illusion that there is something behind foregrounds 1 and 2 as they move out of the way of the true background. Then we'll go back into DaVinci Resolve and drag this clip into the timeline, and we'll put it all the way down at the first layer and use it to replace the original background image. Now, as foregrounds 1 and 2 move out of the way, they will not reveal their originals on the prime background plate. And since the prime background is going to be zooming in as foregrounds 1 and 2 move out of the way, the primary background will gradually cover over any imperfections in the altered background, so that it is not revealed as just artificial background. Now, at last, the illusion is set. Every piece is in place. It's time to render the pieces into a video. Let's take a look at what we got. Join me for a voyage into the heart of the Heart Nebula, passing by magnificent structures light years in scope, as we journey to the mysterious tower deep in the core of this most beautiful of nebulae. I'm going to go ahead and let this clip scroll all the way to the end. As always, thank you for watching. And if you like what you see here and you enjoy learning by way of my channel, please take a moment to hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe so that you can be notified promptly of upcoming videos. Now, get out there and shoot the sky.